So yeah, what I will do is I'll just some of the time I think when I'm speaking to you, I'll take the cans off and I might flip the cans off and on depending on where we're at in the thing. But it's all cool, mate.
Perfect. Okay, welcome to Off the Beaten Track podcast. Joining me today via the means of Zoom in lockdown is co-founder of XL Records, founder of Positiva Records, music manager, finder of The Prodigy, and most importantly, Trailblazers podcaster, which we will be talking about all of these things in the duration of this podcast. Hello, Nick Halkes.
Hey, how you doing, mate? You all right?
Yeah, good. So we've not seen each other for a few months, or I don't think anyone's really seen anyone for a few months, have they?
That's right. Apart from over the interwebs, and it's just not the same, though, is it? Really?
No, it's really not. I mean, I'm looking behind you at the moment, and from what I can see over your shoulder, Nick, it looks like my bedroom in 1989.
Well, that's one of the advantages of more time at home. Basically, I've got a big plastic bag that's been disintegrating, that's been stuffed full of flyers and posters and stuff like that over the years. Never got chance to do anything with them, really. I do it. I mean, I've DJ'd, quite a lot over the years, although, maybe not at a really high profile sort of level, but I run this club night now with my best friend Andy called Reach Up, and then over the years there's been a whole bunch of Positiva bits and stuff under the name Halkes for a little while, and a lot of XL bits. So all of these flyers just go in this plastic bag, and then being at home all the time, I actually managed to fish these things out, and instead of a blank wall behind my decks in my sort of music room at home now, yes, you can see a whole bunch of sort of flyers and posters that I've stuck up, which are, maybe 30 years worth of gigs and events that I've been to. So you can see various bits. Yeah, Prodigy posters and bits with Positiva logos in Israel and New York and Canada, and yeah, I've been very lucky, really, Stu.
Well, Nick, how have you found? I mean, you just said there you've travelled the world as a DJ and obviously as a label boss and such. And how have you found all of a sudden being confined to your home?
Well, the one thing that we do have a bit of control over is how we perceive things ourselves. We can work on viewing the world around us as having opportunities or as having lots of threats and challenges, and the reality is it's both. But I suppose I've had a mixed bag of emotions, as probably we all have. But I guess I've tried to view it as an opportunity to rest up a bit in a way, in the sense that I've spent 30 years kind of in and out of clubs sort of most weeks. So it's probably been the longest period since I was maybe 15 or something without setting foot inside a nightclub. So maybe that's a good thing, a bit of a rest and a bit of a break from that scene, a bit of a recharge of the batteries.
Do you feel like, because I'm very much the same as you, obviously I run a nightclub, and it's the longest as you were saying that then, I was just thinking, wow, yeah, this is the longest I've never been in a nightclub, because I'm still there every week. But what I want to know is, because you spin a lot of plates, as a businessman, and what I'm interested in is something that I've sort of struggled with, having a few different bits and pieces on the go in lockdown. Are you able to kind of allow yourself, like, an afternoon and just go, oh, do you know what, I'm just gonna watch TV this afternoon? Are you comfortable with that, or do you feel guilty for that and feel you should be doing something work-wise? Because I find if I stop for lunch, I'll put the TV on and just have a sandwich, and I watch TV. And the minute I finish that sandwich, I think, right, I've got to carry on. And I haven't in reality.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how you deal with that. Do you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, when the whole thing sort of started, like many people, I thought, oh, right, so there's an opportunity here to do the things that I've not done, and maybe I can learn a new language and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. The reality is I haven't learned a big new skill. It's not like I'm going to come out of lockdown going, oh yeah, I can speak Mandarin now. No, it's not happening. It's not happening. Nice idea, but no. So I would say that there's still quite a lot of work stuff flying around. Even though the artists I manage are not touring, there's still a whole bunch of communication flying around, people making records and doing stuff and making things happen. So I would say that I certainly haven't felt at any point kind of like I've maxed out the things that I can do. I mean, I hear people say, "Oh yeah, I've watched everything on Netflix." Or, I don't think there's anything more to watch because I've done every series go. I'm certainly not in that category. So I've continued to work. I've continued to be pretty busy. And on the guilt thing, do I sort of find myself feeling guilty? I mean, I haven't had many afternoons where I have just watched TV and done nothing because there's usually other stuff flying around. But if I do spend a bit of time doing non-work stuff, then I don't feel guilty about it. But I suppose what I would feel is that if I'd just been chilling for the afternoon and not looked at email, I'm sure I would then feel come 11 p.m. or midnight, I'll be like, yeah, I need to kind of get back across email, and then I'd probably spend a couple of hours working. So, but the fortunate thing is that I do enjoy what I do. So whilst it is work, it is, I do enjoy it. So it doesn't necessarily feel like, oh God, this is such a terrible thing. I've got to jump on email at midnight.
Yeah.
This is awful. Because I'm engaging, I like working with artists and I like being involved in helping records to emerge and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, there are definitely people who have been more radically affected by the whole lockdown thing than myself. I mean, the economics for everybody who's involved in artists who tour or run clubs, that certainly is massively affected. So, I mean, I mentioned the Reach Up night that I do earlier. So that's at the Bussey building in South London, traditionally monthly. And then myself and Andy had about 6 gigs lined up, I think, on consecutive weekends. We had Dublin, Manchester, Glasgow, Dundee, somewhere else. And for us, those just all, disappeared. So obviously, just on that one, a major impact. Yeah.
As a fellow DJ and promoter, the one thing that seems to be the thing that's currently, constantly being sort of said to me is, well, you have to understand that your industry is probably going to be right at the back of the queue when it comes to things starting again. It's like,
Yes.
Obviously there's going to be major sporting events and things like that, but gigs, clubs, festivals, it's huge amounts of people in confined spaces. So, I can't see there being a quick fix to that.
There isn't a quick fix. And I do wonder what the shape of it all will be as and when it does return, and how different it may be to what we've known before.
Absolutely.
And it is a concern. But I try to look at the world around me and draw out what positives I can.
I think
from
that's
it.
a very important thing to do, mate.
Yeah, and I think I've always probably I've been fortunate in that I've always probably been orientated towards that, or tried to do that where I can. And we will just, we've got to take it a day at a time and see where it lands. I mean, I think the music industry will, there will be people who won't be able to continue being full-time artists because they just will have to do something else to keep afloat. People who had relied, who maybe were recording artists, but relied completely on gig income to pay the rent rather than recorded income. A whole bunch of those people will have to do something else, or we'll have to modify. I mean, we'll see paid for streams, live streams, kind of starting to have more profile, but the level of income that they'll generate and what kind of artist you need to be to earn significantly for paid for gig streaming, all questions that are yet to be answered.
Well, let's get on with today's playlist. And
Sure.
Nick, I will start obviously with track one, and track one is the song with the greatest ever intro.
Yeah, well, this is difficult because there are lots of records with great intros, but the reason I picked the record that I've picked is because I have a very clear memory when I was in my teens of hearing this record, and at the time I heard it, the whole record, not just the intro, but the whole record, I thought was basically the best record ever made. And I thought, how can any other record ever be better than this? It's just the pinnacle. It sounds exciting and dynamic and futuristic and funky and edgy, and it ticks all the boxes for me. And when the intro of this record starts, and whenever I hear it again, it takes me back to being a teenager growing up in Portishead, which is just outside Bristol on the coast, down there in the southwest. And I hear it again, and I think, wow, I'm blown away by the emotions that hearing great music sort of triggers, if you like. So yeah, I picked a record called Hip Hop Bebop Don't Stop by Man Parrish.
So what I want to ask, which I ask musicians this, and let's not overlook the fact that he was a musician, but what I'm more interested in is in the sort of label side of things, and the sort of A&R mind that you've got in regards to intros. So you know,
excuse me, sorry. One second, Stu. I just got to have another cough. 1 second, mate. Right, I feel much better now. Thank you. Sorry.
Good to go, mate. So, I mean, the track you chose is kind of early, sort of electro, sort of early doors hip hop, really, I guess.
Yeah.
And in regards to maybe sort of hip hop and definitely the early sort of stages of dance music that you was involved with, at the early rave scene, and right the way through to the work that you still do with Liam, and a Prodigy, intro. The intro, especially from the A&R point of view, like, how key is intro in the music genres that you work in? Because dance music is historically kind of tailored towards DJs in areas, and there's not them instant rock and roll beginnings that are sort of intros. Whereas with dance music, sometimes is tailored towards the DJ to allow mixing and stuff like that. But what did you look for, and what do you look for, and how have you seen the changes in intros in music?
I mean, you want something ideally that both grabs you So it instantly excites you and engages you, but also hints that something else really interesting and exciting is going to happen. I mean, the easiest intros for club DJs to mix are boring as hell to listen to just as a regular punter. 16 bars of 4/4 beat, you know, if it's a house record, or 16 or 32 bars of some kind of break beat rolling along. If it's, you know, if we're going back to rave records, you know, the best DJ records were easily mixable, and something that's easily mixable is not necessarily going to be the most interesting listen. So you've got functional kind of intros on records, which help DJs to support them, and then you've got intros to records that are just designed to be interesting, engaging, dynamic, and all the rest of it. I mean, really, in terms of making great records, the best records aren't ones where the producer has thought, let me make this easy, let me make it functional. That doesn't necessarily make the best record. It helps to get a record played, but it doesn't help make the best record. So you know, I'm looking for all bits of you know, a record, a track, or if I'm listening to a demo from an artist who, you know, is interested in me working with them management wise, or I consult and help new artists now. Also, I do some kind of one-to-one consultancy with developing artists, and sometimes artists say, hey, you know, can you listen to my tracks? And I'll try and figure out if I can help them. You know, I'm saying to them, just make the best music that you can make, and make something that's engaging and dynamic and interesting and says something. So I think that in the general sort of record making space, I'm encouraging artists to put their best foot forward, if you like, rather than think too much about how do I package this up in a sort of functional manner. I think artists need to know where they sit in the ecosystem. So I think that's useful. So if I'm speaking to a new artist and I say, hey, kind of, I might sometimes say, hey, if I've not heard your music, who might you be categorized next to? Hey, if you like Amy Winehouse and you like Joss Stone, you might like artist X. I think it's useful for an artist to have that kind of understanding of where their, you know, where their audience may be, but equally just do your thing, make great records. Hopefully, if you've got something to say it well, say it coherently, say it with confidence, and even if it's a theme that's been explored before, let's see if you can say it in a way that's a little bit different to the ways that it's been said before. And these are the kind of areas of encouragement and advice that I give to artists that I'm working with.
I think that's probably the best that question's ever been answered, Nick.
Oh, well, thanks. That's good to hear.
Excuse me. Nick, track 2, the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you.
Yes, so we go further back with this one than Portishead days. This one takes me back to watching Top of the Pops as a kid, when I used to live in Loughborough in Leicestershire in the Midlands. And I watched Top of the Pops, and Top of the Pops was the big thing. So one night of the week that everybody watched music television, and whatever you saw on that show would be the big talking point in schools up and down the land, and, you know, work cafes and workplace hangouts or whatever. It was a big, you remember it, Stu, it was a big thing, right?
It can't be understated how huge that program was, how important that program was, how much of a talking point and how influential that was, because music television didn't exist, and it was like you got what was available, and that was the moment. Half hour Thursday nights, top of the pops.
That was it. And of course you didn't have the internet, so you couldn't just go and be exposed, just go online and tap it into, you know, into new interesting music easily. If you were either watching Top of the Pops or you were listening to cassettes or bits of vinyl that you'd purchased or that you'd raided from your older brother's room or what have you. That was how it rolled. And this pop group, Sweet, were the first pop group that really had an impact on me. And interestingly, they were also the first pop group that I actually kind of saw sort of in person. Now, not at a gig, but my brother took me to Loughborough University, and Sweet were playing one evening there, and I was maybe 7 years old, 6, 7, I'm guessing around about that era. But he took me down there just to have a look about, if you like, in the sort of late afternoon after school, when the band was sort of turning up for a sound check. And I sort of caught a bit of their presence. They turned up in a cool looking tinted windows kind of car, and they did their sound check and they shut off again. And I just was touched by a bit of pop star sizzle and glamour, and all that kind of looks exciting. But I was very, very young.
And he looked like a rock star, didn't he?
Yeah, that was Brian Connolly was the lead singer, and they all were over the top. It was an era of glam rock, and everything was big and impactful. The glam rock acts were not subtle; they were in your face and all that. And so the single that really touched me and excited me, and then became the first single that I remember going to buy as a 7-inch in Loughborough Market, was Teenage Rampage by the Sweet.
What a great name for a song for a young lad to buy. Teenage Rampage. What more do you want as a young boy?
Yeah, exactly. And obviously way off my teens at that point, but thinking, all right, yeah, this is what it's all about, is it? A kind of exciting world, I suppose, of that I wasn't yet, that I didn't at that age have access to. And you're right, a great song title. And again, just something that made me think, wow, this whole thing is very interesting and exciting and dynamic.
So that emotion would have been like sort of wonder and excitement and...
Yeah, it would have been all of those things. Wonder, excitement, maybe, priming some kind of imagination or anticipation about what this whole thing was about, music and performances and gigs. So obviously when you're 6, 7 years old, you don't really know what a gig is. You've not been in that sort of environment. But I suppose I was starting to imagine what it might be like at that age. And then fortunately, by having this sort of chance to just catch a bit of the vibe of the band arriving to do a sound check and then disappearing off. Bizarrely, I guess my first interaction with a pop star, or close presence to pop stars, wasn't being a paying punter and watching the gig. Funnily enough, it was slightly a little bit different to that. It was a little bit more behind the scenes-y, sort of sound checky. And that's perhaps interesting when you look at my development, that then I went on to be a little bit, more behind the scenes kind of guy. So I don't know.
Well, I want to touch on something that you just mentioned there, behind the scenes, but you was also part of the scene as well. If we're talking about the early days of rave culture.
Yeah.
And going back to Top of the Pops, did you get to perform on Top of the Pops?
I did.
Come on, how was that? I want to know all about that.
Well, I've actually been on Top of the Pops twice, funnily enough,
Nice.
Stu. Yeah. So once
Are you going to spoil the magic?
Ah, well, no. I mean, I'll tell you the what I remember most about Top of the Pops was that the week that the Bounce by Kicks Like a Mule, which is a record that myself and Richard Russell made together, the week that was kind of high enough in the chart for us to be invited on Top of the Pops. I think it was maybe number 7 or something that week. Was also a week that we had a record out by an act that I had signed called Dream Frequency, who had signed to the City Beat label. So the Bounce, even though essentially I was primarily involved in kind of running XL at this point, the Bouncer didn't come out on XL. It actually came out on Rebel MC's Tribal Bass label. But yes, what I remember well about Top of the Pops was that not only was I there as an artist, but there was also another artist there that I'd signed and kind of A&R'd and helped them get their records together, Dream Frequency. So the day was unusual for me because I sort of flipped between artist mode, and then I'd go and see the act that I'd signed, who were also playing on Top of the Pops that day, and I'd be saying things like, "Yeah, it looks good, but maybe should we shift the keyboards over a bit, and maybe the dancers can maybe be a little bit more upfront," kind of. So I was flick-flacking a little bit between behind the scenes kind of record label guy mode and artist. So that, I mean, maybe that's it's possibly quite unusual to have both of those experiences on the same Top of the Pops day.
Spinning plates even back then, Nick. But I mean, what was interesting as well is on Top of the Pops 2 at the moment, which he's still on BBC 3 or 4, I can't think which channel, and I love watching it, and it's around 1988 at the moment, and it's a really interesting time to sort of see how historically Top of the Pops was, rock and roll bands and, guitars and amps and, or pans people behind them. And then with the sort of evolution of electronic music and rave culture, they didn't seem to know what to do. And it was like, right, okay, so we're going to have to give this guy like a keytar and he's going to have to sort of pretend to do that. And, otherwise we've just got 2 guys standing behind synths. And
this wasn't a problem just for Top of the Pops. It was a problem for the industry as a whole. A head scratching. What are all of these records about? What do we do with these records? For the major record labels, it was a kind of, how the fuck are these records just turning up at number 7 or 4 in the chart, and we've not heard them. We've not heard them on radio. They've not, and I got a few calls at the time actually when we were having that run of big smashes at XL, starting off, I suppose, with sort of top 15 records like Anastasia by T99, Cubic 22, Night in Motion, and then it became bigger records, all of the Prodigy stuff and SL2, and and I got calls from guys that I knew at major record labels saying, Nick, I'm just calling up, check in, see how you're doing. Oh, well, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah, no, well done on whatever record had gone in at number 3. Oh, cheers, man. And then it would be, I was just wondering, what do you think kind of helped with that? Was it the video that was important, or did you get much radio? These were major label guys basically going, roughly translated, how the fuck is this happening?
Yeah.
How on earth are these records exploding? We are literally sat in our offices scratching our head trying to figure out how this thing is happening.
So I'm presuming you're getting these messages from sort of major labels that have huge marketing teams and structure, and you've got this exciting new independent label that's romping the charts. It's
absolutely.
It's fucking punk rock again, isn't it?
It was indeed, because these records were not coming through the traditional system. And there was something incredibly exciting about that you could have a big hit record without daytime playlists and without a video that was featured on, the main programs, it really was, power to the people, so to speak. That with the right record, that those who were tapped into this exploding scene, that alone could deliver your record, into the higher reaches of the chart. And these could be records that had been made by a kid in a bedroom, and maybe the label had only paid £1,000 or 1,500 quid to sign the record. And then, 12, 15 weeks later, it could be sat at number 2. It was a very exciting period. There's no doubt about it.
And, I can see the Prodigy poster over your shoulder, and it'd be criminal not to say that, looking back then at bands and Top of the Pops, how they would sort of struggle as to how they can make, these chart bothering dance records like, a visual spectacle, and not just a couple of guys with it. I mean, if there was ever a template as to go from that to festival headlining, one of the most spectacular visual things you will ever see is the Prodigy live. And it's not just, the Chemical Brothers do things amazingly with visuals and things like that, but Prodigy just rewrote it. They took dance music to rock festivals, and it's that's something that's very, very impressive.
Yeah, and they never did Top of the Pops. Interestingly, we were talking about Top of the Pops. So whilst I was happy to bounce around behind a keyboard when Kicks Like Mill were top 10, the Prodigy view was where it's not something that we want to do, so we're not going to do it, even though everybody else is doing it, and even though we know that our records potentially would be bigger, and hey, maybe we would have had a number 1 record with a record that sat at number 2. That's fine, because we don't want to do it, and that was part of the template as well of an artist knowing what they're about, knowing what's right for them, doing what's right for them, sticking to their guns.
And I think that's
a lot of lessons.
To this day, it comes across that they do their thing, and that's their thing. And okay. Track 3, Nick, the song that reminds you of your time at school.
Yes. So when I was, we'll go back to Portishead here. So I was in the Midlands when I was junior school, infant school age, I suppose, and then I moved to Portishead when I was maybe about, let's think, was I 10 years old, maybe then, something around that, I guess. It was when I was going to school in Portishead that I first found myself in an environment where there were DJs who were playing records and had flashing lights and all of that. It was the school disco, which was delivered by always school discos were run by this mobile disco setup called Crazy Psychedelic Shack. And myself and my best mate, Andy Smith, who I now run Reach Up with, and Andy went on to provide samples for Portishead, which is Jeff Barrow, who's a couple of years younger than us at school. And Andy did world tours with that band and went on to do his Document Mix album series and loads of stuff. But anyway, when we were both kids, we would stand there near to the decks when Crazy Psychedelic Shack would do the mobile disco thing. And we would, see them queue up records, that thing where you put the needle in the groove of a piece of vinyl and wind it forwards, wind it backwards. And we were just kind of a bit mesmerized by how that whole thing worked. We just were trying to figure out what was going on. They actually, rather than a pair of traditional headphones with 2 kind of cans that you put over each ear, they queued up their records on an old telephone handset. So a thing that like you hold in one hand and one thing goes to your ear and one thing goes to your mouth. They used to
Mark Moore from S Express still uses that to this day.
Yes. So they used to use that to queue up their records. And when Andy and I first saw them with that thing, and we were like so what's he doing? Because we didn't know that you queued up records, and we didn't know that something like that telephone thing, could be used to figure out where the start of a record is. And we'd be like, the guy's on the phone. Like, he's DJ. We're like, what is he doing on the phone? And the only thing we could think of was, is it some sort of close, sort of proximity, almost like a walkie-talkie? Is it like a thing where he's asking somebody who's outside in the van to bring in some more, Depeche Mode or something? Is he saying, we've had somebody who's requested Depeche Mode and haven't got any here, can you bring some more in from the van? We didn't know, but then we figured out, that they're queuing up records, and the guys who run that that mobile disco, explained to us what they were doing, and we even got to sort of practice queuing up a couple of records. So all of that engagement was our first exposure to what it's like to be in an environment where people are DJing, and there's flashing lights, and there's a dance floor full of punters, and we loved it, and we were hooked. Funnily enough, my best mate Andy had a big birthday celebration a couple of years ago, and he managed to get hold of Crazy Psychedelic Shack, and he had his birthday celebrations in the common room at our old comprehensive school that we went to, and the guys played, and Andy queued up the same record that he'd queued up on their turntables as an 11-year-old or something, all of these decades later, and it was lovely, man. So yeah, that was a superb way to celebrate a big birthday. And the record that I've picked that reminds me of school and school discos and Crazy Psychedelic Shack is Michael Jackson, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. And the reason I picked this is that as people filtered into the school common room, ahead of or whilst the school disco started, it would kind of get busier, and the guys would just have their music on at kind of half volume level as people milled around. And then it got to that point where there was enough people in the room that Crazy Psychedelic Shack thought, yeah, right, let's have it now. And then they put on a sort of countdown jingle. They'd have a couple of pyrotechnics that would explode, and then it would slam into the front end of Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, and suddenly the dance floor would just be packed instantly in a click of the fingers. And so when I hear this record, I always think of that. So that's the one I've chosen.
That's wonderful, Nick. And whatever people's opinions are on Michael Jackson, separating the man from the music, that track, I think, is one of the greatest dance records ever made. And,
it is.
And the edited version at the beginning, without the kind of the longer intro, as soon as you hear that whoop, and then I think it's one of the greatest intros ever. It is. You can't not dance. It just gets you. It's just perfect. Absolute perfect.
It is. Well, I could have had that one as best intro as well, but then I wouldn't have had this story to tell about school days, would I? So I had to save this one for the school days bit.
Oh, it's brilliant. What did you want to be at school, Nick?
I was into football originally, and then, like so many sort of young boys, I guess, football's your thing, and then you end up flipping across to music, really. And obviously sometimes the football passion remains in parallel, or sometimes the football thing disappears a little bit as music takes over. So I had a phase where I was very keen on football. And then from 12, 13, 14, 15, I was really getting into music. So when I was at school, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could work in radio, maybe as a sort of radio DJ, or records, maybe some kind of being a record promoter or working for a record label. So I had the music bug pretty heavily through my teens. So again, I think I was fortunate in in the fact that I knew it was my passion at a pretty early age, and then I was able to sort of follow that passion by doing a bunch of stuff when I was at school, when I was at uni, that all linked into it. And I think all of that stuff meant that when I then left uni, I went to Goldsmiths College, did a communications and sociology degree. I mean, to be honest, the way that my interest in music shaped my studies was profound, in the sense that I only applied to unis in London. I just figured I don't want to be in Newcastle or Glasgow or Brighton, because there aren't any big radio stations based there and record labels and big magazines. I want to be in London, where Radio 1 is, and where all of the record labels. Yeah, so I kind of figured I only want to study in London, and then I got a place at uni in London, and then that meant I could do other stuff, run club nights, and kind of help out, intern. I kind of helped out at Radio 1 actually when I was at uni. I kind of was a member of a thing called the Pop Panel, Sunday mornings on Radio 1, reviewing records. I kind of blagged my way into. And so, in answer to your question, yes, it was music in some shape or form, but I didn't quite know. And then I think when I left uni, I was thinking it would be great if I could get something in either radio or records and see what happens. And perhaps if my first job that I got offered was as like a junior record librarian or something at Capitol, maybe I would have really gone down the radio line. But the first proper job I got offered was doing dance music promotion, kind of working on club and radio for an independent promotion company called Secret Promotion. So then I found myself in the records kind of lane, and stuck with it.
Okay. Track 4, you mentioned The Sweet earlier, but as the first single you bought from a record store. Can you remember any others that you bought for track 4?
Oh, I mean, I bought plenty of records over the years. Remind me what track 4 is.
Track 4 is the first song that you bought from a record store.
Oh gosh, that was The Sweet.
Yeah.
Because it was. I've answered 2 questions in one, haven't I?
That's fine.
The emotional impact and the first song. I mean, so I would say, that if we're looking for interesting stories, we should move on more on to. Did you want to do something about clubbing years?
All day long, Nick.
Do we get into that one?
I've been looking forward to this one. So for track 5, Nick, the song that soundtracked your years in Clubland, which it's interesting because for so many guests that I have on that are musicians, they go, "Whoa, blimey, that was in the 90s. I was doing." It's like, you ain't stopped, so you're still there.
Yeah, which makes it a tricky one to answer. Yeah, because I mean, like we talked about lockdown. I mean, I've been in and out of clubs all the way through, decade on decade. So sum up, pick a tune from your clubbing era. What you mean, the era between 14 years old and 52? Pretty funny. Well, the track that I picked here is one that perhaps reflects the most intense clubbing era that I had, but not clubbing as a punter, but being in nightclubs as a DJ. So between let's think, the first and second year of uni, in the summer holidays, I went out to Magaluf in Mallorca, and I got a job DJing in a bar, first of all, in a little bar, which in its own right was quite entertaining, because I don't think this place had a dancing license. So I would DJ in this bar, and I'd be getting the music whacked up, and people be dancing on the tables and standing on the bar and all of this. And then the guy who owned it would keep looking over his shoulder nervously out the window while all this was going on. And then presumably what would happen is occasionally maybe a local councillor or or a local police person or something would wander by, and then he'd come over to me and go, no, Nick, you must go, and he'd usher me into this sort of stock room where all the crates of beer were, and I'd hide in the stock room while everybody would get down off the tables in the bar, and he would play some music at sort of half volume, and people would scratch their head and go, what? Oh, okay. And some would drift off out, or some would just go sit down, have a quiet drink. And then presumably it was the local councillor or something was like, oh, right, that's fine, everything's in order there, and would disappear off again. About 5 minutes later, he'd come back into the stockroom. Nick, okay, now you go again. And I'd come out, start cranking out, everybody get back up on the tables and start dancing on the bar again. So that was the first gig in Mallorca, in Magaluf. But then, it was a bar rather than a club. And I'd been there for a couple of weeks, and then I got offered a job at a big club called Tokyo Joe's. And Tokyo Joe's was quite appealing because, one, the music that was generally played there was kind of more really dance based. So it was funk and kind of early house, and some some early rap records was the kind of soundtrack they expected. And it was a proper club, so people could properly dance all night, and the owner didn't stick me in the stock room at any point. But what it meant was that I DJ'd there from probably 10 or 10:30 at night through till 6 a.m. every night of the week for months. And I probably did about 86 nights or something, not in a row, DJing at this place. And, when you DJ 86 nights in a row or whatever it was for approximately 8 hours a night, you are putting records on in your sleep. You are waking up thinking that you need to put another record on because it's such a dominating part of your life. But you learn a lot from it. And what I learned there was that, the big tunes of the day, if you want to keep the club full, then you play them 3 times a night. It's a very different skill. It's not one of these, it's not like the skill of a DJ who just turns up for an hour and blasts out the big tunes and then disappears. This is a skill that resident DJs in clubs and bars all over the world have learned. Like, hey, okay, people are coming in, it's getting a bit busier. Yeah, I'll play the big record now. It's 11:30 and it should get a load of people on the dance floor. And then because it's a big record, come 2:30 in the morning, if a few people are starting to thin out, I need to draw for that record again. And probably when it reaches 5:30 a.m. and you're trying to keep the stragglers still there, you pull it out again. So this one record I seem to play at least 2 or 3 times a night for most of this summer of DJing in Tokyo Joe's in Magaluf. And I've picked out New Shoes. I Just Can't Wait, which is a record that I still have the same bit of vinyl that I played in that summer in the 80s. And it's got, it's a piece of vinyl that's got played at Reach Up club nights in Berlin and Lisbon and in the Bussy building. And
they were German, weren't they, New Shoes?
You what? Do you know?
Were they German New Shoes? I think they were.
Possibly Dutch or maybe. German. One of the two. Yeah, one of the two.
What a record.
Yeah, it's a great record, isn't it? But it's funny that same record that got all of that kind of play there still is something that I carry around with me, doing the Reach Up stuff. But actually, it goes further back than that, though. So whilst I play the New Shoes thing, I mean, there's records that Andy Smith and I, going back to the other anecdote, there's records that we bought as 15-year-olds, going into Bristol on a Saturday afternoon, going around the record stores, and we might have bought Brothers Johnson Stomp or some Earth, Wind and Fire thing, or Above and Beyond by Edgar Winter, or whatever, these records that we bought as 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And those records we've been supporting and playing at our sort of roving club nights over the last few years. So it's crazy, isn't it?
Wonderful. And while we're talking hometowns. For track 6, Nix,
Yeah.
your favourite song from an artist from your home county?
Yeah. So growing up in Portishead, we were, kind of maybe a half-hour drive or so outside of Bristol. So Bristol was where we would go to on the bus to look around the shops, and then would to go to some gigs, and club nights and all the rest of it. And there is a lot of great music that's come out of the West Country and Bristol in particular. I worked on some West Country music when I started at Secret Promotion. So I was working on Smith and Mighty, who had a couple of big kind of down-tempo cover version records, neither of which were big pop hits, but they were big records at the time. Walk On and Anyone. And I've picked another Bristol act for this. I've not picked a Portishead record, even though that's very, very close to home. But I've picked Unfinished Sympathy by Massive Attack, which is a big favourite for many, and it's a thing of real beauty. Still sounds amazing. It's timeless. It's going to sound amazing in 10 or 20 years or 40 years time if we're all still around. Or maybe it'll be a bunch of cyborg robots listening to it at that point. Who knows? In a bit of tumbleweed. But yeah, a great record from close to home. That's why I decided that I would pick that one.
I think it's as close to a perfect record as you can get, and I think I mentioned it the other day when I was recording one of these, that so many bands have, so few bands have this one song that sounds quite different to the rest of their catalogue of works, but just refuses to date. It just still sounds as fresh today as it did then, and yeah, and an incredible band. But that moment, and Shara Nelson's vocal is just wonderful.
It is. Isn't it amazing how some records still manage to sound futuristic when you listen to them 40 years after they've been made? How does that work?
Nick, that's the conversation I was having. That is exactly the conversation I was having. And I referenced Fool's Gold by the Stone Roses. I mentioned How Soon Is Now by the Smiths. Like, these songs don't sound like their other works, yet they just sound like they're from out of time from somewhere, and it's brilliant.
Some of the records that I think of when I think of records that still in some way sound futuristic. So I Feel Love, Donna Summer.
I mean, that comes from outer space, that record. No one on this planet made that. Impossible.
Amazing, isn't it? And then you listen to Kraftwerk, Autobahn or something from 1974 or whatever it was, and you're like, are you joking? Are you kidding me? This was made in 1973, 74? It's astonishing. But that's,
So what I like to do on this podcast is obviously talk to guests about songs that have soundtracked their lives. You've just mentioned Moroder and Donna Summer there with I Feel Love, and you've obviously mentioned Kraftwerk. Pioneers of electronic music, and so it seems like a good point to mention the podcast that you and Eddie do.
Yeah, so that's Trailblazers, Electronic Pioneers, and then depending on when exactly this recording kind of goes out, we're probably at the time that listeners are hearing this, it's either the new series is probably just about to drop or is just started. And that's our third series, and we've got some excellent guests in this third series. So we speak to Trevor Horn, for example. So that's an interesting conversation where we're talking about Frankie Goes to Hollywood with him and ABC, and also the Malcolm McLaren records.
I mean, all landmark productions there.
Yeah. So that's an enjoyable one. James Lavelle is in there, a guy who's also got astonishing, history, and Arthur Baker Also, so he obviously produced the Rocker's Revenge, Walking on Sunshine, and Planet Rock. So
Freeze.
yeah, that's right, IOU. So
New Order.
Yes. So we're blessed with our guests in the new series of Trailblazers, and we've been blessed with the guests in the episodes that led up to the new series, with some amazing conversations. And if you haven't heard the podcast, they're all out there, and there's some really cool conversations that we had with people like Fatboy Slim, Goldie, Paul Oakenfold, etc. And yes, you're right. It's myself and Eddie Temple Morris, so it's a nice kind of triangular conversation. The conversations don't seem to be as formal as some one-to-one interviews are.
Yeah,
the conversation can kind of be a bit more fluid, and somebody can say something about Berlin, and then somebody else will go, "Oh, actually, I was in Berlin a couple of years ago, and this happened." And really nice, really enjoyable conversations. But also, it's an archive of people who aren't going to be around forever.
100%. 100%.
So it's something we enjoy doing, and we hope that the Trailblazers podcast will act as a really useful resource. If in 5 years, 10 years time, people go, yeah, I want to dig more into this whole electronic music thing and find out who did what and when. Hopefully there'll be a lot of interesting stuff that people can discover.
And I'll say that, without blowing too much smoke up yours and Eddie's backsides, it was a big influence on this podcast. It's one of my favourite podcasts to listen to, and I knew Eddie, and I'd not met you until I'd heard Trailblazers, and we met through Scroob, and I think I said to you when I listened to the first series, the Daniel Miller episode knocked me sideways, and it was fascinating, and the one that really surprised me was someone whose body of work I thought was just the M People, and when I listened to that, I was like, oh my God, like this guy that I dismissed as not being a fan of the M People, I was like, I'm not really, I'll give this one a spin, and it was probably my favourite episode.
Well, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, so that's the Mike Pickering episode, and yeah, what is interesting is that so many people have so many interesting stories and are much more than just the headlines. And that's why it's endlessly fascinating for me to talk to people, not just in music, but in all areas, because I always find out interesting stuff, because people have experienced so many things. You can just take the view, let's say you get into an Uber, you can go, hey, I want to get to from A to B, and that's why I'm in the Uber. So I'm just going to get from A to B and focus on my journey, and that's it. But equally, sometimes it's an opportunity to learn all kinds of stuff, learn about what it's like to experience war in Afghanistan, or learn what it's like to move to wherever as a kid, and all sorts of crazy stuff that people have experienced. And people have fascinating stories, and that's great that on Mike Pickering that you were able to learn so much more about him, because of course you just thought, it's the M People going, I'm not into M People, maybe kind of dismissed it, but that's a guy who's done amazing things, and it's one of the great pleasures of my life, meeting new people, learning about them, talking to them, and I'm kind of working on some new podcast initiatives at the moment that will hopefully give me some more interesting conversations over months and years to come.
100%. Well, let's go back to Nick Halkes, the DJ. For track 7, it's your opportunity to play somebody a song that they may not know that you would like them to hear. Yes.
I mean, this is a tough one as well, because how many really good records are there out there that the majority of the population just haven't heard? Many, because it's hard to get people's attention. It's hard to get people's ears across new music. Everybody's busy. I mean, this lockdown period has been different because at least we know that people have primarily been at home, and haven't been jetting around or busy rushing to out of their homes. But then again, during lockdown, there's been people who've been up to their eyeballs parenting young children, and still they've not had the time to listen to new music in the way that maybe they would have liked to. So very difficult choice of all of the records that are out there. There's one wonderful record from a Grammy-nominated artist that I manage called Engineers Experiment, and myself and Stephen Brains manage Engineers Experiment, a name that perhaps is not known to most listeners. But there's a wonderful record called Symbol, and there's a track on this album which is called Light from One, and it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music that I know, but most people don't know it. So I thought I'd pick something that was a record that I've worked on, and I've worked with the artist, but it kind of goes to show that there can be artists that one can work with, and you can have big success and everybody knows those records, and then you can also work hard with other artists and the records just don't find their way through, and that's the nature of the music industry, and it's something that we have to accept working in the music industry, that there will always be great records that don't get the level of attention that they deserve. That's just part of it. So the record that I thought I'd play is Light from One, featuring Anne Brun. It's by Engineers Experiment.
Wonderful. Well, will there be a Spotify playlist accompanying this podcast with all of the songs that you've chosen? And I'm going to throw some of the other ones in that we've spoke about as well.
Yeah.
And so, Trailblazers Weekly Podcast.
Yes, that's right. So a new episode each week for the duration of this new series. If people want to find out kind of what's happening in a bit more detail, where are we at, what's the next one, all the rest of it, then they could follow me on my socials, Nick Halkes, NickHalkes on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and then I'm usually posting some clips of the episode that comes next. So yeah, that's
I'll
happening.
tag you and Eddie in all the posts when this goes out as well. So
brilliant, yeah.
Be able to access it all, and I'm sure there'll be some love shared via Pod Bible as well, because it is a podcast that, as I said when I first met you, I'm a big fan of. So
brilliant. Well, thanks for your support, man. We appreciate that.
It's a pleasure to sit and talk to you. Thanks ever so much, Nick.
It's been great. You take care, Stu, and I'll speak soon. All good?